Welcome to the program today, everybody. Mondo Gonzales here in studio, and I have our good friend Keelan all the way from England through Skype. And we're going to continue our Road to Zion series, which I encourage you, if you haven't seen the previous 9 episodes that we've done, you can see that on our YouTube channel. Check out the playlist there. Also, we don't say this too often, which we should, is if you want to download our app, you can see that, Prophecy Watchers app. All of these programs are there as well. And simply what we've been doing is we've been looking at the modern history of Israel, so to speak, all the way from the time of the first century, talking about the land. Whose land is it? All the way up through the years, through the last 2,000 years, who were in the land, what was the debate and the wars that were going on in the land as well. But really what we've been trying to do is focus on getting to this place really in the last 150 years as it relates to Israel. How did Israel become a country in the modern era? And so we've been doing this. It's been a great time, and we're continuing this study, and we want to continue to go all the way up, even as it relates to eventually to the future of Israel. And Graham is going to be in town. He's coming all the way from England across the pond, and so he's going to be here in studio with us live the next time, which will be good. So Graham, here we are. Welcome again.
Okay, thank you, Mondo. Yes, the story, as I say every time, the story continues, and we're getting, hopefully over the next few sessions, we'll be able to draw the story to bring it to a conclusion as much as we can conclude, and get out of the past. And we're kind of now, we're still in the past, move to the present a little bit, but then definitely move into the future, and see from the scriptures how this really incredible story of God's redemption in the world. That's what the story of the Jews is all about, right? And of course we are redeemed people, and so we seek to understand what that redemption is, and our redemption is tied inextricably to the land of Israel and to the people of that land. So let's not forget that. What we have sought to do is really from the outset, for me anyways, to say that the idea nobody's replacing anybody here. We're just kind of understanding our place in this great redemptive plan for the nations, and we're part of the nations, so it behooves us to know what it's all about, right? Especially again, Mondo, as we're dealing with it now, this very morally complex, politically complex area, this time period that we're in. So yeah, looking forward to sort of being with you, and so that's going to be shortly anyway, isn't it? So So yeah, that's kind of what we want to look at. So yes, last week we looked at the how it had come to the idea of the British government producing this white paper, if we remember, the infamous white paper, Neville Chamberlain's government. And so we're just going to continue that story, and we're going to get to the war, what's called the War of Independence for the Israel, and the catastrophe for who become known as the Palestinian people, right? So this one we've called Partition and Catastrophe, because in one sense, when we get to this, and I will pose that question right at the end, it seems to be a catastrophe all round, to be honest with you. Did it have to come to this? But let's get to the point of that question. So before I continue, is there anything you wanted to say to that?
I do. The only thing I will say is I really appreciate the way that you framed it, because I think as people watch this, we know, at least theologically, that there's different camps in the Christian church as it relates to Israel and the importance of Israel, national Israel. But the phrase that you use, which really spoke to me, is the idea of redemption of the nations. And it's this idea that some people will say, well, God doesn't need to do anything with national Israel. He's already redeeming the nations through the gospel. And we agree with that. But there's something, I think there's this if that's true, that there's nothing else needed, then Paul would have never written Romans 9 through 11. And Romans 9 through 11 gives us this background that God, of course, is redeeming the nations through the gospel, and that's true. But you have this, the plan of Israel is left unfulfilled as national Israel, and all the promises that we see in the Old Testament of Jesus ruling and reigning, the Messiah ruling and reigning on earth, over Jerusalem, over a literal kingdom, all the prophecies that we see as it relates to the millennial kingdom, that happens with Israel, national Israel. And so you have this hanging out here, and that's why Paul says in Romans 9 through 11, all the way to Romans 11, that all Israel will be saved at a future point in time, national Israel, and then all the promises are going to be brought back in together. So part of the full final redemption, not only of the church and the nations, but also Israel itself receiving the Messiah, it's going to be brought back together. And of course, as we know, God can't redeem national Israel unless there is a national Israel. And so this is part of what God is doing to restore that and to fulfill His promises, again, as Romans 11 is very clear. So I appreciate that. And I also remind people too that, Graham, he's an Englishman, okay? So he's given us kind of the ways in which England was very central and the British were very central in what happened in the restoration of Israel. But as we see in this particular session, we're going to see that the British didn't realize, I think, all of what they were getting into. And I also think Graham's going to bring out some other things here that help point to, I'll say it this way, Graham, that when I studied this in college, I had this very naive view of Israel that they could do nothing wrong, but we see that that's not the case if we look at the history here. And so anyways, as that is a backdrop, we're seeing God moving, we're seeing the British. Take it away.
Yes, okay, so here come the British, right? And at the end, there go the British, at the end of this period. Yes. So where we were last time then was this white paper, the idea that the British had done this complete, after suppressing the Arab revolt, they'd done this complete volte face towards the Zionist project, and we read that speech with Winston Churchill, and that. And there are reasons for this, right? Because for Chamberlain and all of the British have to win this war. I mean, it's without. It cannot be. The idea that they can lose this war is so unconscionable, and it would be catastrophe for the world as well. So you can understand in some ways that Chamberlain's reasoning was, he tried to negotiate with Hitler at Munich. It had failed, but now the British did have to keep the Arabs on board with their allegiance, because if they'd have lost the Middle East, they'd have lost India. Then I suspect the war would have been lost anyway. So there's more than one thing going on here, with people sort of making these decisions. But it is, as we heard from Winston Churchill, it is an almighty retraction, a reversal from the Balfour Declaration, and a betrayal of the Balfour Declaration. So this is what happens. And I mentioned it last time, and I'm just going to read this. And again, I'm just referencing Simon Montefiore, Sebag Montefiore's book, and how he puts this. He says, Malcolm MacDonald, the colonial secretary, issued a white paper that proposed limiting Jewish land purchases and restricting immigration to 15,000 people annually for 5 years, after which Arabs would have a veto, Palestinian independence within 10 years, and no Jewish state. This was the best offer the Palestinians were to receive from the British or anyone else during the entire 20th century. But the Mufti, displaying spectacular political incompetence and megalomaniacal intransigence, rejected it from his Lebanese exile. So, and again, we're talking providence here. And, as I've gone through this story and over, I thought about why did none of this come off? Why even from the Jewish side, even from what the Israelis were willing to compromise on, why did none of this happen? Is there some, why did the Arabs keep rejecting time after time after time? And I have my own sort of thoughts on that. I don't have God's thoughts on that, but I have my own thoughts on that in terms of, God is working towards a plan, and God can turn the hearts of men, and he can, like he did with Pharaoh.
That's what I was thinking. Is Pharaoh?
He can say, I can change this, and you're deciding this. And so a lot of times it's because if you're an Arab, and of course, if you're a moderate Arab, you're thinking, well, no, we can sort of make this work. One of the scenarios, these counterfactuals, Mondo, of history, and I'm jumping here a little bit, but I do like these conversations. One of the counterfactuals of history is that, so we discussed last time Prince Faisal, right? So Faisal wanted the Greater Syria. Now, what if Britain had acquiesced to his demands with Faisal, and given him the thing called the Greater Syria, which would include and sort of like just said to the French, sorry, we're going to renege on that agreement, and we're going to give Syria to Faisal, and then the Zionists had their state within this Greater Syria, right? An autonomy under Muslim Arab rule. And Faisal was very much for the Jews. He believed that the land of Palestine, as it was then called, belonged to them. That was their rightful place. Well, in the end, of course, because of what we said last time, was his dad, Hussein, of the Hijaz, he lost out to Ibn Sa'd, the house of, and so now the British are wondering, what do we do with these two brothers? How do we recompense them? Well, in the end, they give Mesopotamia to Faisal, right? Iraq. So it was the kingdom. It was the kingdom of Iraq. But you know what? He was overthrown. I think it only survived till about 1959, and he was overthrown. And then, of course, you have the modern day state of Iraq. So even again, what would have happened if Faisal had been given this territory of Greater Syria? And if he was already overthrown even by his compatriots there in Iraq, so. I love thinking about these counterfactuals, but you just know that somehow God is keeping this thing on course, but it's a mess. I mean, and I'm not swearing when I say this, it is a bloody mess. This is warfare. We're going to see there's a three-way warfare here in these 10 years, and people are killing each other left, right, and center. So that is kind of that's where we're at. And just to quote this, so basically, Ben Gurion now he's kind of he mobilizes his Haganah. Haganah means defense, and his militia for war against the British, basically. So this is 1939.
There you go. I was just going to say, share with the people, like, what's the date, and what are the time periods that we're in right here?
Yeah, so we're now talking 1939. The white paper has gone through. It's been approved. It's been passed. And of course, there's that famous saying, "We'll fight the war." That's the Second World War, as if there were no white paper, and we'll fight the white paper as if there were no war. But before this, war hasn't broken out. So Ben Gurion has prepared his Haganah militia. On the second, the Jews now riot in Jerusalem. On the 2nd of June, the Irgun. Now there are different militias, Jewish militias now that spring up to varying degrees of extremism. Some of them embark on complete terrorism. Ben Gurion seems to want to walk a fine line, but now he's effectively declaring war on the British state. So remember, before the Arabs had declared war on the British Empire. Now is the time for the Jews basically to do that. But one of these organizations was the Irgun, and we don't have the time really to do a background of that organization. But we'll get into who was leading these organizations, because it's really very interesting. But anyway, on the 2nd of June, they bombed the market outside the Jaffa Gate. They killed 9 Arabs. On the 8th of the last night of his stay in Jerusalem, there's a young American visitor, John F. Kennedy, and he's the son of the ambassador, U.S. ambassador to London. And he says he heard about 14 explosions in the city, the Irgun knocking out electricity across the entire city. And it says here now, he writes here, many now share General Montgomery's view that, quote, this is what he says, now get this, is this not prescient? The Jew murders the Arab, and the Arabs murder the Jews, and it will go on for the next 50 years in all probability. Well, add another 50 to that 50. Right, and we are still there. So Montgomery's trying to bring order. Now, Montgomery, if people don't know who he is, he's going to be the famous general who wins that decisive battle in the Second World War against Germany, against the Desert Fox, Rommel. Is Erwin Rommel, is Edwin Rommel? One of these, in E. Rommel, and literally turns the course of the war. So he has great kudos. But before that, he's in Jerusalem. He's trying to re-establish British control of the city. And he's not really going to tolerate any nonsense, neither from Jews nor from the Arabs. Let's just skip here a little bit then to what's happening in the Arab world. So everybody knows about the Mufti, Hajj al-Hussein. Hussein, you remember the guy we ran into right at the beginning in 1920. He toddles off to Berlin, remember, because he's the guy in exile, right? He's dispensed with all of his leadership, not the threat to his leadership, the competition to his leadership. So all the moderate Arab leadership has gone. Maybe we can work with the Jews. Maybe we can do something. And it's interesting because even in 1937, Ben Gurion wrote in a letter to his son, Amos, here's what he wrote. We do not wish and do not need to expel Arabs and take their places. All our aspiration is built on the assumption, proven throughout all our activity, that there is enough room in the country for ourselves and the Arabs. And he kind of like been having conversations with the Muftis, his people, not the Mufti himself. And he said, look, it's like one big sofa. There's room on this sofa for both of us to sit there and share this land. So basically, the Mufti now, though, he's gone off to Germany, and Hitler receives him there. And the things that Hitler says, he says, he's sort of he kind of likes the Mufti. He thinks the Mufti has a bit of Aryan blood in him. He likes his red hair and his blue eyes, and he considers him an Aryan. Of course, that's a passport then to, I can work with this man, So Hitler, said Germany was engaged in a life and death struggle, I get this, with two citadels of Jewish power. And who are the two citadels of Jewish power? Britain and the Soviet Union. And so naturally, there's going to be no Jewish state in Palestine. And he says here that Hitler was resolved step by step to ask one European nation after another to solve its Jewish problem. And as soon as, quote, German armies reached the southern exit of Caucasia, Hitler said Germany's objective would then solely be the destruction of the Jewish element residing in the Arab sphere. The Mufti later on, chillingly, he boasts that he supports the Nazis because I was persuaded and still am that if Germany had carried the day, no trace of the Zionists would have remained in Palestine. And then in his memoirs later on, he writes, he reveled in the fact that Jewish losses in the course of the Second World War represented more than 30% of the total number of their people. So, this man's an anti-Semite, clearly, he had no intention of ever really engaging with the Zionists to solve the problem. That's probably the last time, Mondo, period 34, 35 is the last time really where there could be any idea of a Jewish state, because now the positions had hardened. A shared Jewish Arab state, So anyway, it goes on to say here that, so there's a diarist called Wasif. I'm not going to try and pronounce his second name, but he was actually, and Simon here, he makes kind of reference to his material, and he says he writes in his diary that Arab Jerusalemites, they weren't necessarily anti-Semitic. They weren't Hitlerites. He's saying it would be wrong to sort of categorize them all as that. But they had a loathing for the British for, quote, their injustice, dishonesty, and the Balfour Declaration, and hoped that Germany would win the war. This is what the diarist is saying. They used to sit listening to the news, waiting for headlines of German victory, grieving over good news for England. So again, you have the Arabs. This is why you can understand why the British needed to keep the Arabs on board. That there would be no insurgents. They're fighting to literally in the end rid the world of tyranny. But the last thing you want is something happening over there in the Middle East. But it's not only the Arabs who want the Germans to win. Strangely enough, there's another group of Jewish militia. So you have three. You have sort of the Haganah, which is the defense. Then you have the Irgun, and then you have a group called the Lehi, who were kind of, they were the real extremists. So the Irgun was kind of in between, and the Haganah. But also, what had happened is interesting. A cruel sense of irony for the British is because they didn't want Palestine to be taken. They were in a pincer movement with the Germans coming up from Egypt and Vichy France, who were controlling Syria, because Vichy France was in the hands of the Germans. So they trained up Jewish militia, called them the Palmach, to sort of a Jewish brigade to look after the area. So they would have excursion. So there was kind of like this little of a love-hate, because when Montgomery came in to take over Palestine, or the policing of Palestine, he sort of clamped down on all the Jewish militia. And there was one young man there in his early 20s. He will come into the play later on, Moshe Dayan, and he was thrown into prison along with his comrades. Well, in the end, of course, the British had to release him because he becomes part of the Palmach. And he is now fighting for the British, doing their excursions, to stop the Germans the Nazis coming in from the north. So a strange twists of fate in all of this, But I suppose the British are used to that by now, right? Okay, we'll just have to do this the best way we can. But what's going on here is the Lehi. In fact, there's no truce with them. They conduct this war against Britain throughout the Second World War. And they also attempted to enlist the aid of Nazi Germany against the British. So you can imagine you're in here and, who are my friends? Who are my enemies, right? Because I know your enemy. It's just like you don't know anyone. So and it was interesting. So in the Haaretz newspaper, which I found, I did a little research on this one, I think it must have been a couple of years ago or last year anyway, because I'll just read out what it says here. It says that 81 years later, this is a report in the Haaretz newspaper, which is a liberal left-leaning newspaper in Israel. But 81 years later, they say, it is still hard to understand how Jews in the land of Israel could have believed in enlisting Nazi Germany in the struggle to liberate the homeland from British control. One of its leaders, Zettler, was kidnapped by the Haganah militants in 1942. He told them, quote, "We will communicate with any military power ready to help with the establishment of the Kingdom of Israel, even if it's Germany. If Germany agrees to help us fight enemy number one, the English, will team up with it. It's not an enemy of the Jews in Israel." I'm thinking, well, no, it's just an enemy of the Jews everywhere, but there you go. But again, we've seen this in the story, haven't we? The Jews have been all at sea on this one, even the Zionists, I mean, you mentioned that in another previous episode, that they'll enlist the help of anyone who's going to sort of like help their cause. Do you want to add anything to that? Because I've been talking for a bit there.
No, I think what you're saying here is tremendous. It reminds people of the complexities of what we're seeing here. I mean, but the key thing in all of this is that God was using the British to train the Jews and in as you mentioned, as brigades, which later becomes their defense in the War of Independence. So God is working in all this, and only God knows the majesty of how He's going to work it all together. But the sides switch all the time, but God's hand is moving in the midst of all of it.
I mean, yeah. I suppose let's just give a bit of a circumspect view on that. Men make war because they are evil, right? So the only one who makes war in righteousness, we see there, isn't it, Mondo, for the Book of Revelation, is the Messiah of Israel, right? And that's why it's made that statement is made in justice and righteousness. He makes war, So, ever since the time of St. Augustine, right? The idea of the just war, it's a cloudy doctrine, So we're going to see here that there's treachery. There is treachery, but again, just to pick up your point, that even in men's treachery, when we look at Jesus, right, with Judas, God works His plan in how and God has entered the wars of men, and the greatest war He entered, of course, was a war against sin. But let's just come back to our story then. So the Irgun, the Irgun had joined the Allied war against the Nazis. But so the guy who led this, who led the Lehi, was the guy called Avram Stern. So it becomes known as the Stern Gang. Anyway, he gets killed by the British, 1942, and then he gets headed up by a new leader, and I won't mention his name just yet. But anyway, he starts to test the British resolve over this, and he's still on board with them. But even as much as late as when Britain and the Allies, of course, America's come into the war a long time before then. 1944, they're planning D-Day. Is that there's still this little war going on in Israel with Zionist, extremists against British rule. The Lehi twice tried to assassinate the High Commissioner in the streets of Jerusalem. In Cairo that November, they killed a guy, Walter Guinness, Lord Moyne, minister resident in Egypt. So Churchill, who is a Zionist, I mean, we'll get back to him, but he was a friend of Churchill, and he called these people the vilest gangsters, these Zionist extremists. Of course, Churchill's trying to now is prime minister. He's trying to win this war, right? So, but he knows there's anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism in his administration, even in Palestine, and I mean he actually was thinking about trying to even rein that in, but I think Palestine it just became a strategic stronghold for the war effort against the Nazis. Anyway. But let's now move to the end of the war. We're going through this very quickly, as people are going to be aware. We get to 1945. Churchill is defeated very surprisingly in a general election. Oh, just to mention something about Churchill. So while he was prime minister, do you know now he loved Jerusalem, right? So when he was colonial secretary in the 20s, he would hold court on the Mount of Olives. Right, so you could just see him there, holding court there, on the mount, a bit like Jesus, holding court with people coming to them with their grievances, and he would try to get to the Temple Mount as often as he could. Right, he just loved the Temple Mount, so that there's something calling him there. Anyway, the summer of 44. Now, remember do you remember the picture when the big three met at Yalta? Roosevelt, Stalin, and Churchill. There's that famous picture. They met at Yalta for the conference because now the Allies are about to win the war. So now it's what do we do? And of course, when they do meet, it's FDR is saying I'm a Zionist, and Stalin is saying me too. They're all like, it's just because Stalin is a complete anti-Semite, but he's just thinking even if there is a Zionist state, then it will come under the influence, the sphere of the Soviet Union, right? Which is why even after the war, interesting about the contribution of the Soviet Union to the state of Israel. So anyway, but here's something really interesting, and it's just a little anecdote. Churchill apparently that summer of 44 wrote to Stalin suggesting an Allied conference in Jerusalem. And he said there are first-class hotels. He even sent him the directions on how to get to Jerusalem. He said, come by special train with every form of protection from Moscow to Jerusalem, Moscow to Tbilisi, Ankara, Beirut, Haifa, Jerusalem. And you could just, when I saw that, I saw the picture of, you take the big three there at Yalta as they're sort of carving up the world ahead of them. Can you imagine these three sat on the Temple Mount, right, under a sukkah or whatever it is, just sort of like dividing up and reordering the world. I mean, that would have been a picture for the historians, right? And maybe it was a good thing it didn't happen, right? Not on the Temple Mount. But you can imagine Churchill would probably have done something like that. Hey, that's where we're going to have our photo. Let's just go sit on the Temple Mount. But anyway, he did. In the end, it was held at Yalta. That was the famous conference at Yalta. So just an interesting anecdote. So anyway, Churchill is defeated in the general election in 45, and a new government, a Labour government, is put in place here under Clement Attlee as the new prime minister. And again, just a little interesting anecdote. So he had adopted Williams Blake anthem as his Labour Party. So we have a song here, Jerusalem. I don't know if you know about that. The hymn Jerusalem, did those feet on ancient time walk upon England's mountains green, and was the Holy Lamb on God on England's pleasant pasture scene. So anyway, so that's the Labour Party conference. So it just says here that they're promising his people a new Jerusalem in Britain, though he proved quite incapable of governing the old one. So, and I think from here is where it literally sinks. The British ship sinks in terms of the Mandate project. There are 100,000 Jews in Jerusalem at this time, 34,000 Muslims and 30,000 Christians. The Brits are trying to figure out, is it going to be a British-run state? Do we even partition Jerusalem and the Brits control the holy sites, etc., etc. So, and this is where the immigration problem comes in, because obviously, if we remember, the White Paper had suppressed Jewish immigration, and very few Jewish immigrants come to, may even manage to get to Palestine. could they have even gotten out of Nazi Germany at the time? The time to flee Germany was actually before, was in the late 30s, not in the middle of the war. But it's really afterwards that the British begin to turn away. It's really at the behest of the British Foreign Secretary, Ernest Bevin. Again, it's just kind of like what Foreign Secretary is in office at the time, as the present one at the moment, we might make mention of, but Lord Cameron, but that might be for another time. But anyway, so they're turning now against, and they're turning refugees away, and basically they're trying to get, obviously, to the after the war. The entire European continent is in movement. I mean, they're all displaced peoples everywhere. They're trying to move back to their places, and Jews are trying to get to Palestine, and the British are literally shut the doors on them. And the famous incident, of course, is the case of the Exodus, which is a ship which sailed all the way across the ocean, down through to get in, and it was literally it was stopped at I think it was the port of Haifa. There was a scuffle on board. The British roughed up the refugees. 3 of them were killed, and the ship was sent back literally to Germany from whence they had come. So things are hardening here, and as a result of this, Ben Gurion then and his Haganah movement and the guy who's running the Irgun and the leader of the Lehi, they agreed to form a united resistance command to struggle the Jewish immigrants back in. And they're quite successful. They get about 70,000 of them back in. Of course, by this time, FDR he died in 1945. Harry Truman's taken over as the president of the US, and he sets up this Anglo-American commission. When things are going wrong, what do, Mondo? You just set up a commission.
Yep.
And he set up this Anglo-American commission because Attlee had literally had closed the doors, and Attlee had hoped that Truman would support his policies against Jewish immigration, but obviously setting up the commission, the Anglo-American Commission, they unhelpfully recommended that the British admit 100,000 refugees immediately. So Truman backs this recommendation. Attlee, is furious. He rejects American interference. And because of this, obviously now what's happening is the Jews are secretly bringing their people and smuggling them in. Now, what's interesting, I mentioned these characters who are head of these various defense militias. So you can help our audience here, Mondo, by telling them what they all have in common. So David Ben-Gurion is really heading up the Haganah, which is the defense, called the Defense Force. Yitzhak Shamir heads up the ultra extremist group, the Lehi. Yitzhak Rabin heads up the Palmach, which was created by the British, and Menachem Begin heads up the Irgun. So what do all of those people have in common? What's the common denominator?
I would say that they all became prime ministers of Israel.
Isn't that just something else?
Yep.
Eh? That's just something else. And not only that, of course, Menachem Begin would later form a political party called Likud, which is the party of
Benjamin Netanyahu. Yep, today.
So it's still going on.
Yep.
That legacy is still going on. So I think if we get there's a continuity to this story, But obviously the Lehi, led by Yitzhak Shamir, and the Irgun by Menachem Begin, by all accounts, we would consider them terrorist movements. David Ben-Gurion, I think, is trying to walk a fine line, but again, there's the adage: one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, right? So I suppose in the end, the Irgun won out, because it's not. I'm not saying that that's what's happening now with Likud. I'm not saying that, but it's just how it's a bit like Nelson Mandela, right? And
Yep.
how it moves from resistance, and some people see it as a terrorist movement, to run the country. So um, so that's where we're at, and then we get to the most famous, really response, is that um, the Leahy want to plan a massive response. Because the British kind of are really clamping down, they bring somebody in called a General Barker. Menachem Begin is looking for retaliation. He kind of like he sort of it is heavy-handed, so he looks for a retaliation, of course, and it's the temple in Jerusalem, right, aka the King David. So this is the famous bombing of the King David Hotel, 22nd July 46, and the Irgun, disguised as Arabs and hotel staff in costumes, and they put milk churns, and in the milk churns they put explosive, 500 pounds, and they put it in the basement. It kind of reminded me of when the Guy Fawkes here, the Catholics, tried to blow up the Houses of Parliament in 1603, was it 1604, 5? Sorry, I forgot my history there briefly. I got so many dates running through my head, I tell you. But anyway, apparently it says the Irgun made an anonymous call to the hotel. Did they? Didn't they? People don't know. Was it deliberately late? We don't know. But it wasn't evacuated. It wasn't evacuated anyway. And in the end, they brought down a wing of the King David Hotel. They killed 91, including Britons, Jews, and Arabs. Ben Gurion denounced the bombing, and from that he split off from and the Jewish agency quit the United Resistance Command. And so this sort of intensified the British demand, the counterattack, and also the British thought, you know what, we're getting out. I think they knew the writing was on the wall.
So that the just for the sake of clarity, this Jewish group bombs the King David Hotel. What was their point? Who were they trying to punish, and what did they think would result? Was it simply just retaliation, or do you think that they were, what was the greater point for it?
I think because basically they had been attacking British police stations, army posts. They kept it to military and authoritative places, but the British administration was in the wing of the King David Hotel, so it was a direct target, and something had happened sort of like that year by General Evelyn Barker. He kidnapped a kid, and he had apparently he'd beaten him, taken him to the forest and beaten him, and whether he was meant to kill him, we don't know. But he actually, in the end, he killed him. He knocked his head against a brick or something and killed him. And then, of course, but it says here that because Leahy attempted to assassinate Barker, they put a bomb disguised as a baby in a pram, etc. But they were looking for something big. They were looking for something major to hit at the British state to drive the British out of Palestine, I think. And I think after 5 years of war in Europe, in a couple of years just carrying the war itself, I think that the British knew that the writing was on the wall, even in terms of their empire, the colonial, and Britain was getting out of everything at that particular time. It was just like, okay, we've done this. So that's but it's interesting, that King David Hotel thing, Mondo. It seemed to one writer, Amos Oz, said it seemed that an invisible muscle was suddenly flexed, and like a curtain came down, and Jews and Arabs stopped mixing together, even in Jerusalem. So it's just something happened. British civilians were evacuated from Jerusalem. The Jews were terrified by rumors of imminent massacre, etc. Montgomery flies back into Jerusalem. He tries to bring some sort of order, and so it just goes from bad to worse. Menachem Begin, now he bombs the British Officers Club, killing 14, and pulled off a breakout from Accra prison. And it's tit for tat. So when his men were flogged, he flogged British soldiers. When his men were hanged at Accra prison for terrorism, he hanged two random British soldiers for anti-Hebrew activities. Churchill, meanwhile, back in London, he's leader of the opposition, and he denounced Attlee's conduct of this, quote, senseless, squalid war with the Jews in order to give Palestine to the Arabs or God knows who, end quote. So it's literally time's running out, and so basically in 1947 the British approach the UN, asked them to set up a commission, to special committee to decide on the future and say we're done here, we're handing it over, and we can't solve it, can you, sort of thing. And that's when, and the last sort of, so that was, then it gets worse. Even while at the end of the days of the British Mandate, Mondo, it gets worse, because it effectively, it erupts into civil war, certainly from November. And the British really have a hands-off approach. They just say, have at it. You two, you kill each other if you want to. We're not involving ourselves anymore. So, and that's what begins to happen. Massacres on both sides. Yeah, so it's all out war effectively. Zionist gunmen are on there in the Jewish quarter. They fire over the Temple Mount. Arabs fired at Jewish civilians. Haganah are attacking this hotel. They kill 11 innocent Christian Arabs. And it's accelerating Arab outrage, a flee of the Arabs from the city. Because don't forget, Jerusalem, there are probably now 3 times as more Jews in Jerusalem than there are Arabs, 100,000 to 30,000.
What's the date? What's the month or so roughly that we're dealing with right now?
We're talking about the 5th of January. We're talking, I think we're looking at about 1940. Are we looking at 1948? Yeah, I think we're looking. We're looking at 1948. Yeah.
Because, what I remember is, in the sense of the timing, the UN partition plan was in November of 1947. So, are we dealing then before or after that?
I think we're looking at after that now, because we haven't really spoken about the partition plan. We're just looking at how it's all completely going wrong, because with the British not enforcing any law and order really in the province anymore, they're just at each other's throats. So there are 4 months left of British rule. But Jerusalem's already mired in a full-scale war, asymmetrical war. In 6 weeks, 1,060 Arabs, 769 Jews, and 123 Britons have been killed. And of course, the Arabs are most vulnerable in Jerusalem. So all of it is the gloves are off essentially. And there are British defectors on both sides. Some defect to the Arab side, some defect to the Jewish side. So again, the British set up command posts below the Jaffa Gate to defend Montefiore. That's the place across the way. The British arrested 4 Haganah fighters, released them unarmed to an Arab mob who murdered them. On the 22nd, Husseini sent British deserters to blow up Ben Yehuda Street. The Irgun shot 10 British soldiers. It's just it's going from bad to worse. And so, so one of their leaders, Husseini, he was like their main leader. He gets killed by the Jews, and they bury him. And at the time of the funeral that they're burying him, it says 120 fighters of the Irgun and Lehi jointly attacked an Arab village just west of Jerusalem named Deir Yassin. People might have heard of that, where they committed the most shameful Jewish atrocity of the war. They were under specific orders not to harm women, children, or prisoners. As they entered the village, they came under fire. 4 Jewish fighters were killed. and several dozen wounded. Once they were in Deir Yassin, the Jewish fighters tossed grenades into houses and slaughtered men, women, and children. The number of victims is still debated, but between 100 and 254, including entire families, were murdered. The survivors were then paraded in trucks through Jerusalem until the Haganah released them. The Irgun and Lehi were undoubtedly aware that a special massacre would terrify many Arab civilians and encourage flight. The Irgun commander, Begin, contrived to deny that the atrocity had taken place while boasting of its utility. And he says this: the legend of Deir Yassin was worth half a dozen battalions to the forces of Israel. Panic overwhelmed the Arabs, but Ben-Gurion apologized to King Abdullah, he's in Jordan, who rejected the apology. Arab revengeance was swift. On 14th of April, a convoy of ambulances and food trucks set off for Hadassah Hospital on Mount Scopus. Bertha Spafford watched as 150 insurgents armed with weapons varying from blunderbusses and old flinthocks to modern Sten and Bren guns took cover behind a cactus patch in the grounds of the American colony. Their faces were distorted by hate and lust for revenge, she wrote. I went out and faced them. I told them to fire from the shelter of the American colony is the same as firing from a mosque, but they ignore her roll call of 60 years philanthropy and threatened to kill her if she did not withdraw. 77 Jews, mainly doctors and nurses, were killed and 20 wounded before the British intervened. Had it not been for army interference, declared the Arab High Committee, not a single Jewish passenger would have remained alive. The gunmen mutilated the dead and photographed each other with the corpses displayed in macabre poses. The photographs were mass-produced and sold as postcards in Jerusalem. Deir Yassin was one of the pivotal events of the war. It became the centerpiece of blood-curdling Arab media campaign that amplified Jewish atrocities. So by March, Mondo, before Deir Yassin, 75,000 Arabs had left their homes. 2 months later, 390,000 had gone. Wasif, living with his wife and children, he's kind of like just in Jerusalem, close to the King David Hotel. He's typical. He records in his diary, I was in a very bad way, he writes, after these events in mid-April, depressed physically and mentally. So much so that he abandoned his job in the Mandate administration and stayed at home trying to decide what to do. Finally, the diary records the reasons that made me decide to leave my home. First was the dangerous position of our house, where he was under fire from the Arabs at the Jaffa Gate, the Jews in Montefiore, and the British Bevan Grant security zone. There was non-stop shooting day and night, so it was hard to even reach the house. The fighting between Arabs and Jews, the blowing up of buildings continued day and night around us. The British fired on Montefiore, blowing off the top of Sir Moses windmill, but to no avail, because they got snipers up there. The Jews got snipers. Wasif wrote that the Jewish snipers in Montefiore shot at anyone walking in the streets, and it was a miracle we survived. He considered how to save his collection of ceramics, diaries, and his beloved ode. His health was deteriorating too. My body became so weak I couldn't handle the pressure, and the doctor told me to leave. The family debated, what will happen when the mandate ends? Will we be under the Arabs or the Jews? Wasif's neighbor, the French consul general, promised to protect the house and the collection. Even if we never come back, Wasif felt they should pack their bags to save ourselves and our children. We thought we would not leave the house for more than 2 weeks because we knew how soon the 7 Arab armies will enter the country, not to occupy it, but to free it and return it to its people. And we are its people. He left in the last days of the mandate, never to return. And of course, this is what the Palestinians refer to in their as the catastrophe. There's massacres on both sides, and as the British leave, it's interesting. They leave rather very ignominiously, and the British troops evacuated their fortress in the Russian compound. There's 250 trucks and tanks rumbled out along King George V Avenue, watched by silent Jewish crowds. The race to control the Russian compound started urged instantly. The Irgun stormed the hostel. And when I read that, what I thought, Mondo, is what were those Jews? They were stood in silence, and as the British left. And this is why I think I said at the beginning, it's a catastrophe for all concerned, really. isn't it? Because, you know, the dream of the declaration, of the Balfour Declaration, to create this national home that perhaps, you know, the Jews can be returned, Jews and Arabs can live together, and it's descended into ignominy for the British completely. They literally they leave shamed, basically, and failed in terms of what they wanted to do. And you know, and maybe the Jews, you know, what were the Jews thinking? Because, you know, they had been protecting them, even, but they wanted rid of the British. Well, they got what they wished, and now it's like, now we're on our own. And you know, it's almost, it seems to be a very somber occasion as the Jews are watching, you know, the final British trucks leave the city and leave Palestine for good, and they never return. So, you know, we should. There's a lot we could say about. Maybe we'll do it on the next time about you know, the war itself. But that's just the Civil War. You know, that's just it was called the Civil War of, and it's sobering. It's. Do you not agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you think about how Israel became a nation and all the years going up, the lack of immigration, you name it, all the things that we discussed, and then we're not even, this is just like a preliminary thing that's been going on for a decade, and then, you know, you come, which we will, to the War of Independence, and it's still not over. And here we are, you know, 75 years later or more, and it's still not over.
It's still not. And I think, you know, when you read this, and when we did this, Mondo, just a personal, you know, my personal thoughts. But, you know, I wanted to get to the story, not just, you know, and you realize how tragic this story is, you know, and it continues to be for all concerned. And you know, there are reasons for that. But it's just, you realize he's the only one who can make war in righteousness. You realize that this thing has no solution. Yeah, it has no solution other than you know, as we understand, you know, the solution is going to be, and effectively this entire story is going to cause the entire world to erupt in devastation, you know. So the sadness, I read this and I'm sad, but the sadness that you feel now is nothing to that which is coming.
That which is coming. Yep. I mean, when we look at, I mean, we can wrap it up here, but as we look forward, and again, we'll make our way there, but it just reminds me of Zechariah 12, that, you know, Jerusalem is this burdensome stone, and that anybody that wants to get in the middle is going to be caught up in the mess. And certainly, as we've discussed, the role of Britain from, you know, the Balfour Declaration as a high point, and this dream, and to see the other things, and then to see the way, as you mentioned, they end and they leave. It just reminds us that at the end of the day, even this, you know, the idea of a peace agreement coming that we imagine in the future between the Antichrist and the Jewish people, that's not going to solve it. We know that because of that, desolations are determined. I mean, Daniel 9, 24 through 27, and only Jesus is going to bring lasting peace.
Oh, only He. I mean, we talk Scripture now. It's good because it lifts you, doesn't it? Oh, but only He. Because we see the images on our TV screens, don't we? Yep. And it's nobody rejoices in those images, you know. No, you just think this is absolutely awful what is going on, and but you realize only He can cause men to beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks, and that men will learn war no more.
Yeah, absolutely. Amen.
And everybody's trying to lift this stone, whether it's Arabs, you know, or the nations, or even the Jews themselves. It'll be interesting. We'll get into the stone, but this stone is not going to be lifted. We'll find out what that stone is. But it's just. But anyway, I know we've gone on a bit on this one, but I just think it's important that we really understand, or seek to understand, the story. You know,
the story back and forth, and again, because, you know, in the midst of it, there's sinners on every side, there's wickedness on every side, there's wrongs and rights on both sides, all the way around. There's not one side. And this is where you have the thread of, you have the promises of God that were given to Israel, and yet you have the intention of trying to fulfill those promises through human means rather than seeing it through God's means. And that's really one of the big stories I see in this. And again, having studied it for a long time myself. But, you know, Graham, as always, appreciate your time. And everybody watching, stick with us. We have some more coming in the sense of looking at some of the history here again. And the goal in all this is just to kind of show the reality of the real truth as much as we can at a limited level in this series, that God is working His will. There's sinful humans on every side, but God's going to accomplish it, again, as Graham mentioned earlier, for the redemption of the world, the redemption of the nations, and the redemption of His plan and His promises to the nation Israel. So appreciate you watching this week, and make sure to catch us next time.